Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and advice that they have to current and future entrepreneurs. In this episode, I interview Shelli Trung, who was named as one of the top 100 investors to follow on Twitter. She has a remarkable story, starting life as a refugee before becoming a successful entrepreneur, and she now spends her time between New York and Melbourne investing in technology startups. In this episode, Shelli shares the right way to approach investors, what she looks for in investment opportunities, what some of her investment red flags are, and why it's important for startup founders to hear no. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Shelli. Hi Shelli, welcome to the Startup Playbook Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
No, not a problem at all. So, obviously, you're best known for angel investing at the moment. Can you take us a little bit more through your background of how you got started and to investing in tech startups?
Sure. So, I'm a relatively new angel investor. I've only been investing for the last 2 years, and it's sort of been a long process. I've been investing in real estate for the last 10 years, so I'm not a new investor, and I was doing that while I was in corporate, and so moving on from that, I ended up starting my own media company. And when I was running my own media company, I interviewed a lot of fantastic entrepreneurs, a lot of tech entrepreneurs specifically. And so I saw a lot of these great investments come through, and I wasn't able to participate because I was running a media company. And so once I exited out of that media company, 2 years ago, I really sort of thought that this was a great opportunity to be able to give back and support some of these entrepreneurs when they're very early stage. So 2 years ago, I really started angel investing with that knowledge of being an investor for the last 10 years, and also having seen a lot of these companies come through in the 3 to 5 years when I was running my media company.
Sure. And so just going back a little bit, how did you go from investing in real estate and, from what I understand, doing quite well there, to wanting to take the plunge to start your own startup?
I think I always wanted to start my own thing. When I was working in corporate and investing in real estate, I set myself a goal that by the time I was 30, I would leave and run my own thing. Not because I was unhappy in my corporate role. I was actually very happy with my positions in corporate. I got to do a lot of technology innovation, but I think I just wanted to go out on my own and to make some mistakes and to learn some new things. And so from that process, I think, I did well enough financially in real estate to be able to take time off and explore and do something new and run my own business. And so, I had hit 30 by then. I'd done really well in real estate to be able to self-fund my business and exited out of that. And at the same time, the 2009, the global financial crisis came through, and the real estate market in the US collapsed. And again, property prices took a massive tumble, and I saw an opportunity to be able to drop everything and go over to the States. And so I took that opportunity in 2011, went over, invested in a lot of real estate out there when the market very much dipped significantly, 50%, and I did well out of that also. But while I was doing that, I was, like I said, running my own media company, and then just saw a lot of these tech companies come through and opportunities I missed, particularly a couple of companies that went on to be multi-million-dollar companies in real estate technology. And so I combined my expertise in real estate with investing, and now having run a successful media company, I was able to combine those elements and really focus on areas of real estate tech that I personally like to invest in.
Sure. And so with the media company, can you tell us a little bit more about the forward journey and how it led to the acquisition of the company?
Sure. So Forward is actually the rebrand of what was Investors Beat. Investors Beat was kind of like Entrepreneur magazine, but instead of profiling tech entrepreneurs, we profiled a lot of real estate entrepreneurs, real estate investors, real estate tech entrepreneurs. So it was very similar that way. We were very dedicated to being online and profiling up and coming entrepreneurs as well as investors. I really sort of saw the gap that technology was getting a lot of noise, and real estate investors were, in my opinion, just as creative and doing just as well in terms of accumulating wealth. So through that process, in addition to that, we had a lot of real estate publications being in print still. They hadn't moved to being online, they weren't digitized, and again, I saw an opportunity to be able to rebrand that whole process. I know that there was a gap to communicate with the younger generation when it came to learning how to invest in real estate, and so we eventually got acquired by a print company, someone who'd been in the print industry profiling real estate investors in print for the last 10 years and had a circulation of about 10,000. We hit that in the first 3 months in terms of visits online. Obviously slightly different, but the potential was very much we were able to amass a pretty big email list, 5,000 in the first 3 months also. So we eventually got acquired, our IP rather got acquired by a print company that had struggled to come online, couldn't quite understand how to work that medium because they'd been in print for so long and couldn't seem to readjust. We had a couple of acquisition offers, and both of them were from real estate companies who'd been in print or had a portfolio of real estate companies and really saw our digital medium as the next generation and being able to access them in a very fast and reliable way, and saw our potential for growth.
Sure. So was there, I guess just diving a little bit deeper into that, how did you sort of sort through the different acquisition offers that you had and decided on the one that you decided to go for?
So the acquisition offer was really unexpected. We had rebranded. We had rebranded to Forward. We were in the process of raising funding, and we had actually gotten a good number of very interested people who'd exited out of media companies to be on our advisory panel and to be investors as well. For myself, when I come to raise funding, I don't do the thing where I see a lot of decks come to me at the moment where I just get spammed, and it's not specific and it's not relevant. And so for myself, I really went ahead and drew up a list of exactly the kind of investors I wanted, the kind of advisory board I wanted. And for myself, it was really about, people who'd already ran media publications and who'd already exited out of media publications and who understood digital media in a way that I had yet to learn. And so I specifically went to those people to pitch them, and they obviously understood my business a lot better than, someone who invested in consumer products. And so I sort of went through a process of finding investors. While I was doing that, though, when we rebranded, we just got approached by people saying, okay, wow, you've rebranded. What are you going to do with the real estate asset? I said, look, we're still profiling entrepreneurs. We just ended up rebranding to profile entrepreneurs specifically at events. We became more of an events publication and pivoted that way because we worked out that a lot of our real estate entrepreneurs we were profiling were speaking at events, and it tied in with their marketing and media, and we were able to make affiliate revenue from ticket sales, helping to sell booths, because a lot of the people who were being interviewed were looking for opportunities to promote their own business. So it was a very nice tie-in for us, but it very much happened. Our acquisition offers came through because we rebranded. We didn't realize people were interested in acquiring us, and they were interested in specifically their email list. With our two offers, we were very specific about the values of the company and where we wanted to go. So it was a very long process in terms of distilling, is this person going to be able to do something with this asset? Are they actually going to be able to make sure our readers were taken care of and make sure the branding was consistent throughout? We're still going through the process of that acquisition. It's not fully, it's in that medium term phase. It's a 3-year process for us because it is IP driven. And so they've really taken hold of that email list, and And it's in that process of they're deriving revenue from that list, and we've sort of worked out an exchange deal where I'm getting shares out of the company instead. It hasn't been mass promoted in the media yet because again it's a 3-year process and we're about a year in. So our offers were really driven by who understood our values and who was going to continue to make sure our readers were taken care of.
Sure. I think one thing that you touched on that I wanted to sort of dive a little bit deeper into was you were very specific in terms of which investors you wanted to reach and specifically what they could add to your business. I remember seeing a tweet that was sent to you a couple of weeks ago with someone who said something along the lines of, "Shelli, will you invest in my startup?" Obviously, that's not the right way to go about it. But for someone who is, in the areas that you specifically look into, which is real estate, fintech, and impact, what do you suggest is the best way for startups to get in touch with you or investors that kind of meet what they're looking for?
So looking for investors, people need to stop doing it like a transaction. They need to approach finding investors as a relationship. If you're lucky, you get a meeting, and then from that meeting, it's the start of a relationship. It's not a one meeting, yes, I'll cut you a check. That doesn't work that way. And frankly, you don't get the best investors that way, usually. You want to obviously have strategic investors, people who open doors in addition to opening their wallet. So I actually go through the process of how to do this in my General Assembly workshop. I run a workshop every month with General Assembly, and it's a 3-hour workshop. It takes you through how to cold email people, how to not tweet at them to invest. That's possibly the worst way to approach any investor, cold emailing and spamming them. You will get blocked. I will be quite religious about blocking you, mainly because I like to make sure everything in my inbox is clean. But, I go through, the reason I started doing this workshop was because I would get a lot of decks that weren't relevant to me, that were pitched poorly, the emails were written poorly, and I have actually funded companies from cold emails. My very first check was from a 25-year-old guy who had written me a cold email, but it was written really well. He attached his deck, he attached his financial projections, he didn't ask for an NDA because I would have pressed delete straight away. And he gave me, and it was an idea. He didn't have any customers, he didn't have anything, but he had really solid numbers and case studies to back everything up. And again, I sort of go through this process in my 3-hour workshop on how can you get investors on board even when it's an idea. Now this young guy, the team, anyone can look this up. The company I ended up funding was a co-living space out of New York. It's called Founders House. And I brought another investor in, and this young founder had actually hustled so much that he'd reached 2 other investors that I was going to pitch this to.
Wow. But
he'd actually got to them before I had a chance. And I believe his very first check was a $200K round based on an idea.
Wow.
And so there is ways to get funding when you literally don't have any product. This guy obviously did it. And so again, this 3-hour workshop takes people through how would you pitch an investor via cold email, on Angel List, on LinkedIn. How do you do it in a way that gets you the best investors, not just the check, ideally? And on top of that, also, I funded companies out of accelerators. I've funded companies in a Shanghai company that I haven't been to in the last 10 years. And so there are ways to get through to investors, but you need to speak their language, and investors invest based on return. And a lot of people, I think in Melbourne specifically, again, comparing to the fact that I've been to the States and I've spent 5 years in the US, in the Northeast, it's very intuitive for the US to know how the numbers work because they're used to having access to funding. They're used to pitching for funding at a very young or a much younger age because there was just funding around. Whereas I find Australian talent very resilient, very, very smart, and fantastic at building marketplaces, but they don't seem to understand funding because there's simply just not very much of it out there. So they've never had to learn how to pitch for funding. So again, I just saw fantastic entrepreneurs who were building good businesses, but just couldn't seem to understand the gap between what an investor wants. And so after getting back in September, I saw that this was a huge gap, and so I ended up, instead of complaining about the bad pitch decks I was getting, the lack of numbers in them, I decided that I would start teaching a class on it. And I know that it's given results because I've seen pitch decks sent to me before the class and the pitch deck a week later after my class, and it's been a world of difference. Right. So I know that for myself, that's really the value I get from teaching these young entrepreneurs, because again, we have fantastic talent here, but it's that bridging that knowledge gap of understand how investors think.
Sure. So just quickly, for our listeners that are interested in coming along to one of your workshops or accessing your content, what's the best way for them to get that information?
Sure. So you can follow me on Twitter. It's very simple. It's at Shelli Trung. I will tweet out a lot of things about how not to pitch to investors also. And I think one recent tweet was about how I flicked through a deck in 20 seconds and pressed delete. That was my fastest no, more recently. So on Twitter is probably one way. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. You can follow me there, and I usually tweet out where my next workshop is. But otherwise, you can always sign up for my email list at Forward. That's Forward with two F's, ORWARD.IN.
Perfect. I'll make sure that the links are in all of the show notes and everything as well, so our listeners get access to that. But again, one of the things that you sort of touched on was, I guess, some of the differences between startup founders in New York, where you've spent a lot of time, and Australia, and you've spent a lot of time in Europe as well. What, apart from the way that they approach funding, what are some of the other differences that you're seeing, both in terms of the mentality of the startup founders, but also potentially the startups that you're seeing yourself?
Sure. So last year, after I exited my company, I actually spent 4 months in Europe. I spent a month in Berlin, I spent a month in London, a month in Paris, and a month in Amsterdam. So unlike a lot of people who travel to the startup cities, spending a week in and out, I actually made sure I spent an entire month getting to know the sister cities. So, comparing that to New York, London really impressed me. People were aggressive there. They also knew how to pitch investors by actually figuring out what kind of investor they wanted and shortlisting that process. So similar to New York, London, I can understand how London has grown so quickly as a hub, because they were just aggressive about pursuing and asking for business, asking for the check, asking to be paid, frankly. And I think that ties in with not being afraid to get a no. And I feel like culturally in Australia, we're too scared to ask for the check because we're too scared to hear a no, and therefore too scared to fail. I think that mentality is what keeps a lot of startup entrepreneurs scaling and moving much faster. I'd like to see more aggressive sales here. Very, very smart people, but culturally we're a lot more laid back. And I guess also being a smaller community, our reputation is a lot more on the line if we fail. So I guess I'd like to see culturally that change, with a bit of time. And our investors being a lot more pro-risk in terms of funding things which are very much very, very early stage, where it is just an idea. In New York, there is no shortage of checks for good ideas. Sometimes that's a good and bad thing. I know in the Valley, some ideas should not have probably been funded, but at the same time, I feel like there needs to be some of that appetite for early stage investors to just get some ideas out the door and understand that things will change and things will pivot, and help mentor some of these entrepreneurs through the process. Mentoring is available in London and New York. You've got a lot more successful entrepreneurs out there, whether that's traditional business or in tech. Again, I feel like there is that gap here of giving back, and so that's partly why I've decided to teach these courses, teach young entrepreneurs what I was missing in Melbourne myself 5 years ago. One of the reasons I left, in addition to buying real estate, was simply because there was no one who had really successfully exited a media company in Australia, and so I had to end up having to leave to be able to do that. But I think the community here has changed. There is enough. Startup Vic runs fantastic events, and to be able to get out there and actually see investors at events is good. But I think we need to be more aggressive about approaching the right investors and making sure we don't take no for an answer sometimes. I've had founders who I've about to pull out for funding, and they've just been so aggressive that I know that if they're going to fight for my check, they're going to fight for their customer. And so I want to see that kind of resilience, like I'm not going to give up here. And I think we're a little bit shy as a culture to declare that.
Sure. So for the founders that do pass that initial Shelli Trung deleting my emails test and manage to get in front of you, what apart from resilience, what are some of the other characteristics that you look for specifically in a founder that you invest in?
I like to see that the founders started other things and perhaps learnt a lot of lessons. So for me, because I invest so early stage, character is actually really key. i.e., are you teachable? Do you admit that you have some things to work on for your startup? If you tell me that everything's great in your startup, I know that's complete BS. So I know that it's not true. Every single founder needs help somewhere. And I would rather that they are very obvious and transparent to themselves about what help they need. And so, it gives me red flags if everything's fantastic. There's always something, we can do to help or something you need. So that's one of the key things: character, humility, teachability. But on top of that I also like founders who can stand their ground. If they know something, they need to be able to put up a fight. I'm not going to be always right. Your investors are never always going to be right, and your advisors are not always going to be right. So when it comes to something that you are very good at and that you understand it, you need to stand up and be able to voice that in the right way. Otherwise, I really like founders who just get things done, who say they're going to do something and then over-deliver on it. Who very much understand and respect the fact that I have limited time and therefore will do whatever they can to save me time. I.e., if there's some research that needs to be done for something, they've done the research before they've emailed me. So proactivity is really, really important, because that leads to being really productive as well, being really resourceful. Those are sort of the things I mainly look for: resourcefulness, not over... big budgets always put me off, because overspending is what corporate people do, and that's not what startups do. If I'm investing my dime, you better be able to tell me how you're going to 3x it at least in the next 3 to 6 months.
Sure. So again, one of the things that you touched on was that balance between being able to take on feedback, but also knowing when, not all feedback is the same, and being able to kind of filter through the different sorts of feedback that you're getting and figure out what the right feedback is for your business. The next part of that is, what is the normal process that you sort of go through from either, taking a cold email or getting a referral to actually taking that plunge to invest in that startup? What does that process look like for you?
So normally it takes 3 to 6 months. The reason being, it simply sometimes takes a month to book in a meeting with an investor, and then it takes another 2 weeks to 3 weeks to book in a second meeting and a follow-up and a demo, and then, by then the third meeting you might be sending it out to other investors and term sheets are floating around. So 3 months, it pretty much never happens at 3 months. It's really 6 months. So that process very much, from normally referrals, if they're from people I trust, they go faster. I get meetings in a lot sooner, but a very good cold email telling me exactly how I can personally help and why I would personally be interested in that particular startup, i.e. I only invest in real estate, tech, fintech, and social impact areas. Those emails will get better attention, and I will tend to respond straight away or not at all. So after that process, it's usually a meeting. I will want to see, normally I'd like to see the pitch deck before I book in the meeting, simply because I get so many pitch decks these days. I can tell very quickly if I will be interested or not from the pitch deck and the cold email. After that, it's, I have the meeting, and then the meeting is very much like an interview, whereas the pitch deck is like a CV. So once, if you sort of look at the way you apply for a role, look at the pitch deck the same way. The pitch deck needs to qualify that there might be something here. There might be an interesting candidate here. And for an investor, there might be an interesting investment here. And then the interview or the meeting, with an investor is really more like an interview. Do we like you? Can we work with you? Do we want to work with you? Do we want to pay to work for you? Because investors technically sort of do that. They pay to work with you. And so, usually it's, that meeting and then a demo usually at that meeting or afterwards. And then I will typically go out and do my own due diligence. That's usually sending it out to smart people who are smarter than me, who've been investing much longer than me, who have better expertise based on what the deck is. And then it usually takes 2 to 3 meetings for us to work out if we're going to, if this is going to work well together, or if it's not. After the second meeting, I can actually tell how you handle setbacks, because some investors won't be interested. You'll probably be put in front of some angel groups and they won't like what you say. And there's been 2 companies that I've decided not to invest in over the last 12 months. Both of them have crashed and burned the last 12 months. And they both got to the second meeting and something came up, a flag came up, and both flags were around the team. And the reason both of those startups collapsed was because of the team. They had team conflicts. So those things get fleshed out in the second, third, fourth, 5th meeting, depending on how things work. But usually by the second meeting, I'm helping you figure out what kind of investors you have, what kind of investors you should be pitching, and helping you work through that process, because I'm very early stage and I'm happy to do that with promising founders.
Sure. So again, just kind of diving a little bit deeper into the team dynamics, especially at the very early stage, is there any particular things that you look for in terms of the relationships that they've had or previous projects that they've worked on, or do you have any sort of set criteria of knowing how a team will work together, or the likelihood that they'll be able to sort of overcome obstacles?
Sure. So solo founders are always going to find it really challenging to raise funding. I have invested in several solo founders. I've invested in teams that were originally solo founders and then found a co-founder. So because I'm so early stage, I'm okay with that. I will help them bring in co-founders. As an investor, I look at risk based on, if there's only one co-founder, the business is that person. So that's always something that, other entrepreneurs need to keep that in mind if they're a solo founder. The other really, immediate thing is really geography. If founders are in different locations and they're so early stage, that can be a serious challenge, because there's communication gaps, there's momentum in working 2 people huddled in a corner, right? You've got that Facebook team of everyone moving and working in the same space, and because it limits misunderstanding and it speeds up communication. And so, I do think teams that are separated geographically tend to find, they have issues a lot earlier, and working through that can be a challenge. On top of that, also, I like teams that have worked together before. So, co-founding teams that just met at a startup weekend, it's just really challenging finding those teams, because you don't know if this other person has the same values as you. You met them at a weekend. Whereas again, if this team has already worked together in the past, they've been co-workers, or they lived in a dorm together, they know what each other are like, and what sets the other person off, and what makes the other perform better. I think those teams tend to stick together over, tough periods. And so, those are sort of main things I look for in team dynamics. On top of that also, I speak about resilience, but, really can they work through conflicts together? There's always going to be conflicts, and how do they handle setback? How do they handle even understanding realistically these are the obstacles for their own business to overcome? And if they're relatively realistic, I know that, the first way of overcoming a problem is acknowledging there is a problem. And so again, those teams that sort of understand that there are always going to be problems to work over and just keep being solution focused, those teams are the most joy for me to work with, because we're trying to figure out solutions together.
Sure. And I know that social impact is obviously one of the big areas of focus for you. Can you talk a little bit more about why social impact for startups in a more general sense is really important, and what more we could be doing?
Social impact. I think a lot of my investments are real estate tech, fintech with social impact. The reason for that is I don't think we need another, on-demand kittens delivery service. There is only so much on-demand, products that should be out there. And I suppose with a lot of this on-demand product merchandise or startups out there, it does impact the environment. Each time there's packaging, there's delivery a certain way. So, this is partly why I don't really invest in a lot of consumer products as well. And so, with the social impact side of what I invest in, social impact is a way for me to give back to the community. I very much look at deals based on if they're going to give me a return, and the impact is a sweetener. Whereas not every single investor in social impact thinks the way or invests the way I do. Some people very much invest based on they'll do less return for more impact, whereas for me it needs to return, and then impact is really the extra thing that gets me up in the morning, gets me more motivated. Social impact I think has always been a theme of where I worked in corporate as well. I worked in public transport because I believed in serving the community. I did a lot of volunteer work for aid organisations while I was back when I was much younger and not investing. So social impact's been a really common theme throughout my career. And so on top of that, also, I recently ran Tech4Gs, which was a hackathon event that brought in the refugee community to co-design solutions with the tech community. And what we found was the not-for-profit social community were fantastic at sort of doing their own social givebacks, but perhaps weren't really understanding how technology could help leverage what they're already doing and really help enhance it and help it scale. So Tech4Gs for me was really, it was a passion project, but I'm very proud of some of the initiatives coming out of it. And actually, we're having our second pitch event coming very soon on the Saturday. And one of the team that won was really an interpreter service. And so again, that business is very viable on a business level because, government agencies book interpreters all the time. Businesses book interpreters all the time. But one of the challenges is that there are so many different dialects in even just one country alone. And so what the problem was a lot of people were coming into these interviews and booking these in advance and actually booking the wrong interpreter. So technology will help, mitigate some of that process by, for example, recording a video of the actual interpreter and booking the interpreter yourself so that you can be 100% confident that when you turn up for a meeting, that the interpreter is the right one. So, again, technology can leverage a lot of this process, and a lot of non-profits are already paying for this service. It really just takes away a lot of that pain. So I see social impact being another way to give back to the community, in addition to just, a return on investment.
Great. And just quickly, how often is the Tech4Gs hackathon run?
The TechViews hackathon runs based on volunteer efforts. So, we're probably hoping to run another one in Melbourne next year. I know Parramatta in New South Wales, they're running one on the first week of September. I think it's 2nd, 3rd and 4th. So the Sydney guys, Annie Parker, Anne-Marie Elias and Nicole Williamson, who ran the Sydney one in November last year, did really well, and they're running a second one in Parramatta, and I'll be attending that also in September.
Great. We'll make sure that the links again are provided in the show notes. I just, mindful of your time as well, just wanted to finish off quickly with what's getting you excited about real estate or fintech, and where do you see that heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
So perhaps not just fintech and real estate tech, but tech as a whole in general. I do see a massive gap in the social impact area in terms of, we've been doing social impact for a while, but not really understanding how it could be a lot more efficient. So I see a lot of, health tech startups and ed tech startups that have very, very much serious impact to the community doing really well over the next, next decade or so. Those are the areas that are less consumer driven, but more, people driven. And so that's one element. But the other side really is I do see a lot of AI technology being involved in, everything that we're collecting data for. We've been collecting a lot of data, but have we been collecting the right data? And have we been interpreting the data to, help improve lives, frankly? I see, obviously, I believe Apple is opening up Siri for, their API so that you can tap into apps themselves. So, I know one of the companies that I'm currently looking at and I'm very interested in investing in, hopefully my first one in Australia, is really, manipulating the data that's being collected in POS systems. In POS systems for small businesses, and really layering a bot over it so that you can actually extract that data. Wow. And so that you don't actually need an analyst to run a report anymore. You can actually ask the bot, how many orange juices did I sell today? How are my sales doing in paninis? It could be anything really. And again, I see that AI potential as utilizing the data a lot more efficiently. Data science is an area that I'm learning to code in myself, because I do see a massive potential in enhancing lives by using data a lot better, whether that be, figuring out your own small business and how to run it more efficiently, or whether that be actually figuring out where, where lighting needs to be for a refugee community. So, I think collecting that data is being done really well, but let's start interpreting it, and how can we interpret it faster, better, cheaper, more reliable.
Great. And again, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you or follow you and follow your workshops?
Probably, again, just the Twitter feed, Twitter handle, Shelli Trung, SHELLITRUNG, or LinkedIn is the best way to find me. There's only one Shelli Trung, so it's easy to find.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks a lot for your time, Shelli. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Rohit. Lovely to talk to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to episode 2 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. As always, you can find all of the links for the show notes along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes. In episode 3, we have Justin Dry, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of group buying wine deal website Vinomofo, which recently closed a $25 million round of funding. In the interview, Justin was really open about the struggles he and his co-founder Andre faced in the first 4 years of their business, where they made very little money, and the mindset and strategies they used to succeed. If you're struggling with your startup and deciding whether to pivot, persevere, or shut up shop, I think this episode will give you a tremendous amount of insight into how to navigate the lean years of your startup. Now for the question of the day. When was the last time you heard no, and what did you learn from it? You can send through your responses through Snapchat or Instagram, where you can find us at Startup Playbook. On Twitter, the handle is at Playbook Startup, or comment if you're just listening on Facebook or YouTube. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the next episode.